1066, the English kingdom is between a rock and a hard place, as from the north the army of Harald III Severe is rushing to its shores, who plans to take the English crown by force, and in the south, the Norman Duke William is the first to gather an army, since he believes that the English crown rightfully belongs to him. To understand how the English kingdom came to the brink of destruction, it is necessary to go back several decades. After the conquest of the English kingdom, Canute the Great decided to marry the widow of his predecessor, Emma of Normandy, in order to not only strengthen his power in England, but also to eliminate the possibility of a Norman invasion. By 1028, a huge northern empire was under the rule of Canute the Great, which, in addition to England, included Norway and Denmark. His son Hardrada, born in marriage to Emma of Normandy, was supposed to inherit this empire, but it turned out differently. Immediately after the death of Canute the Great, the Norwegian nobility proclaimed Magnus the good son of the previous ruler of Norway, as the new king. In turn, Hardrada, who received the Danish crown, began to gather forces to regain control of Norway. Meanwhile, in England, Hardrada's illegitimate brother, Harald Hardrada, managed to take the throne and proclaim himself the new king. In 1036, Harald I gouged out the eyes of the youngest son of Ethelred the Unready, Alfred Atheling, who had arrived from Normandy, who died soon after, and in 1037 forced Hardrada's mother Emma of Normandy to flee England. Having received news of the atrocities of his half-brother, Hardrada decided to certainly punish Harald I and regain the English crown. In 1039, he made peace with King Magnus I of Norway, agreeing that if one of them died without leaving heirs, the survivor would inherit his crown. Having ensured the safety of Denmark, Hardrada, at the head of a huge fleet, moved towards England, but while the Danish army was on the way, Harald I unexpectedly died, so immediately after landing on the shore, Hardrada was declared King of England. Having taken the English throne, Hardrada in 1041 returned his half-brother, the son of Ethelred the Unready Edward, from Normandy and appointed him as his co-ruler. Unfortunately, the period of relative calm did not last long in England, as on June 8, 1042, during one of the feasts, Hardrada unexpectedly died. Edward remained the only ruler of England, and since, unlike Hardrada, he could not boast of having leadership qualities, quite quickly the real power in the country ended up in the hands of the Godwin family. In 1066, Edward died and the Godwin family reached the height of its power with the election of Harald Godwinson as the new King of England. Not having had time to enjoy royal power, Harald II immediately found himself in an unpleasant situation, since claims to the English throne were made by both the Norman Duke William I and Harald III, who, having become the sole ruler of Norway after the death of Magnus I, decided that he had the right to the English throne. Finding himself between two fires, the English king hastily gathered an army in southern England, reasonably deciding that Duke William would attack first, but the Norman duke was in no hurry. Meanwhile, the fleet of Harald Hardrada, consisting of 300 ships in full sail, was moving towards the British coast. Having reached the English coast, the fleet of Harald Hardrada united with the squadron of the brother of the English king Tostig, the former Earl of Northumbria, who, after an unsuccessful uprising, was expelled from England. Thus, under the command of Harald Hardrada there was a powerful fleet consisting of 360 ships. The fleet of Harald Hardrada began moving along the coast of Northumbria, destroying all the coastal villages along the way. Soon the Norwegian fleet dropped anchor near the mouth of the Ouse River. After which, leaving a small garrison to guard the ships, the Norwegian army began moving towards the city of York. Having learned about the enemy landing on the coast, Earl of Northumbria Morcar, together with Earl of Mercia Edwin, began hastily gathering forces to organize defense. Since Harold's army was in no hurry and focused on plundering all the villages along the way, Morcar managed to gather an army of about 6,000 soldiers and take up defense 3 kilometers from York near the village of Fulford. In turn, Harald, under the command of about 7,000 soldiers, did not expect to encounter serious resistance, since he knew that the English army was in the south awaiting the invasion of the Norman Duke. On September 20, 1066, Harold's army was attacked by a combined army of the Earls of Northumbria and Mercia. Since the Norwegians did not expect an attack, at the initial stage luck favored the British, who managed to force the vanguard of Harald Hardrada to retreat. However, when the main forces of the Norwegians entered the battle, they managed to defeat the English militia and force its remnants to retreat deeper into England. Having learned about the defeat of the army of the Earls of Mercia and Northumbria, the residents of York were forced to voluntarily assist Harald Hardrada in conquering the English throne in exchange for a promise not to ruin York. To continue moving deeper into the English kingdom, the Norwegian army needed supplies, which had to be delivered by the inhabitants of York, and to avoid being stabbed in the back during the advance into the interior of England, Harald demanded that the local nobility provide hostages. While waiting for hostages and supplies, Harald Hardrada, along with most of his army, set up camp east of York near the village of Stamford Bridge. Since the weather was very hot and Harald did not expect an attack from the English army, he and his men left their armor on the ships, taking with them only weapons and shields, and thereby made a fatal mistake. The fact is that at this time the English king Harald Godwinson was quickly marching towards York, replenishing his army with local militia along the way. Having reached the outskirts of York, the English king learned that the army of Harald Hardrada was camped east of the city and was not expecting an attack. Deciding to take advantage of the surprise effect, Harald Godwinson ordered an immediate attack. Early in the morning of September 25, 1066, the Norwegian troops guarding the bridge were surprised to discover the approaching English army. In turn, Harald Hardrada, having received news of the approach of a 12,000 enemy army, sent a messenger to the ships so that the 3,000 soldiers guarding them would come to his aid as quickly as possible. The fact is that Harald had only 6,000 soldiers at his disposal and, thanks to the arrival of additional forces, he planned to at least partially compensate for the enemy's numerical superiority. Meanwhile, the Norwegian army began to quickly form battle formations, and the English army, having defeated the detachments guarding the bridge, began to cross. There is a legend that the bridge was narrow and only one brave Norwegian warrior with an axe was able to block the path of the English army, killing 40 Englishmen. How it was actually unknown, but by the time the English army crossed the bridge, the troops of Harald Hardrada had managed to form battle formations. Hoping to prevent the enemy from preparing for battle, the English king sent his cavalry forward. The attack of the English cavalry, colliding with the shield wall of the Norwegian infantry, quickly choked. Having suffered serious losses, the English horsemen were forced to hastily retreat. By this time, the English army had managed to complete the crossing and, having formed battle formations, attacked the enemy. Despite the numerical advantage, the British attack did not bring the desired result. The Norwegian infantry, having closed their shields, was able to hold back the enemy's onslaught and prevent him from breaking the battle formation. The fact is that the Norwegian army consisted of experienced battle-hardened warriors, while the army of the English king consisted mainly of militia. The battle continued, and at this moment the lack of armor among the Norwegian warriors began to affect them, who, under a hail of arrows from English archers, suffered serious losses. Realizing that the situation was not in his favor, since the numerically superior enemy army would simply crush his troops over time, Harald was forced to try to implement a very risky plan. Having repulsed the next onslaught of the enemy, he, at the head of a detachment of the most experienced warriors, tried to disrupt the enemy's battle formation, get to the English king and kill him in battle. Harald Hardrada had no doubt about his victory, since he was an experienced warrior of enormous stature and possessed monstrous strength. At the initial stage, luck favored the Norwegians. They were able to break through the enemy's battle formation and began to push him back. A little more and Harald Hardrada would have been able to implement his plan and win victory, but one of the arrows of the English archers hit him in the neck and caused his death. Having lost their leader, the Norwegians were forced to retreat and take up a defensive position. The English king's brother, Tostig, took command. Upon learning of this, Harald Godwinson offered to begin negotiations, but Tostig replied that he and his men would continue to fight. Time passed and the numerical advantage of the English army made itself felt. The British managed to practically break through the enemy's battle formation, but at that time Norwegian detachments guarding the ships arrived on the battlefield. It should be mentioned that the Norwegians rushed to the aid of their king in full combat gear. Since the weather was very hot, most of the Norwegian warriors were exhausted, but despite this they immediately entered the battle. The appearance of additional Norwegian forces came as a complete surprise to the British, so their attack was quite successful. Under the onslaught of fresh Norwegian forces, the English troops began to retreat, and it seemed that they could not avoid defeat, but at that moment luck smiled on the English king again. Tostig was killed in the battle, and the Norwegian army, having lost its second leader in a day, wavered and began to flee. Seeing the flight of their comrades, the Norwegian troops that came to their aid also began to flee. In turn, the British army began pursuing the enemy in order to inflict maximum damage on him. Only a small part of the Norwegians were able to get to their ships and return to their homeland. It would seem that Harald Godwinson, having defeated Harald Hardrada, saved his kingdom, but it was at this time that the Norman fleet, led by Duke William, was approaching the English shores. If you liked this video, be sure to subscribe to my channel and click on the bell so you don't miss new videos.